Hi, everybody. Thanks for sharing some time with us today. I know that for some of you, it's the morning. For some of you, it's early afternoon. And we just want to make sure we make great use of the time today. And so we're digging into the topic of objections and really trying to put an end to them. And by putting an end to them, what we don't mean is that you won't have them anymore, but there's a different way to approach them perhaps than you may have in the past. And so what we want to put an end to is any concern or fear that you have of objection or frustration that you have with objections, and really get into some core pieces that are going to help you along the way. So we've got a slide deck here that we're going to go through. I've taken a PDF of it, uploaded it into the resources section of the membership site. So if you just go to resources, one of the first PDFs you'll see there is this slide deck. So I want you to make sure that you have it. So two things that we're going to handle in this very compressed and dense session together. So the first is actual objections themselves. When someone objects, how should we be handling that? And then the second is around reframing. And reframing is a way to get people to see things in a different way. Now, the reason I want to handle objections first is because if you go directly to a reframe with someone, and you'll see this in a second, it starts to put the wrong kind of interaction in place. It's like, you know, if I object or I have a question or something like that, you say, oh, you're looking at it all wrong. Well, that's probably not going to be the way to get me to shift. So what we want to do is first handle objections and then move toward reframing. And I'm going to give you 8 ways to reframe. I think the PDF, I put 11 in there. I just won't have time to do it. But I want to make sure that you've got some pretty cool tools for how you deal with this. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about psychology. We're talking about words. We're talking about the impact of words on people's brains. These are all some of our favorite things. So I want to make sure that you get stuff that you can use. So let's talk about objections. Objections are brilliant because typically we look at them as a negative, but there's lots that's possible when you have an objection. And I'm not saying that from some sort of Pollyanna, oh, let's look for the positive. No, I don't mean that at all. I mean that there's real meat here that we can use when someone objects. And sometimes it's not as obvious, but if we can find it, we can actually go somewhere with it. Now, when people tend to object, typically, so a lot of advisors, and especially younger advisors who haven't had to deal with a lot of objections along the way yet and are still sort of honing their skills, they're wondering what the right answer is. Well, how do you respond to this? And what do you say to this? And what's the answer to that? And the challenge with going to the if-then version of objection handling is that first you have to memorize all these comebacks, essentially. You got to have a comeback for everything. So one is you got to memorize all of those. And then the second is, what do you do when someone has the objection that you haven't learned the comeback for? What are you going to do in that moment? And you still have to have the ability to work with them on it. So the other challenge with having a comeback for people where, you know, they object and then you have some quick comeback is this. You become a know-it-all. And people don't like a know-it-all. As a matter of fact, it gets worse than a know-it-all. What happens is we start an argument with them. So they'll say one thing, you'll say, and you've got an opposite position, and so you want to move them over to your position. And how likely is it, do you think that that's going to happen? And except through sheer force of charisma or force of will with the other person, odds are you're not going to move people very far that way by arguing with them or telling them that they're wrong. I know this seems obvious, saying, Chris, yes, I know this. However, I do know that lots of advisors, and I've watched it happen, client will share an objection and the advisor right away is arguing with the objection and trying to show them essentially that objection is not valid and that we need to go a different direction with it. So there's a more powerful way to get you to move, because think about it. It's like if you argue with someone, does that move them closer or further away from you? You're going to push them away. You're trying to actually get them to move closer to you, move closer to doing some work together. So we can't argue with them, but we've got to do something. So a couple of things. Excuse me. The good news is that as we handle objections, they are like a big wall, but on the other side of an objection, there's either a potential benefit that they're after, or there's information that the client needs in order to make a decision. And so what we want to do is find out what it is and make sure that we handle it appropriately. So a couple of things we have to keep in mind about objections. First, a reflex is not an objection. So sometimes people simply say no. That's their initial response to all things. No. As a matter of fact, it tends to be one of mine. It's like when somebody says something, it's like, no. And then, but if someone stays with the conversation, I'll go with it. So understand this, if someone just says no right away, it could be just a reflex that they have. This is just their typical thing, as opposed to an objection. And the antidote to them is to get them talking. It'll take your mind away from their conditioned response. You can find out a little bit more about what's actually going on. And literally, you could say something like, so when you say no, what exactly are you saying? And some people say, well, no means no. Or people say, well, no, this isn't the right time. Or, we can actually get into the actual objections underneath it. So reflex is not an objection. The second thing is that a condition is not an objection. Sometimes people simply want things to happen in a certain way. And so they have conditions about it. In these conditions, it'll work. So again, the antidote is get them talking and understand the condition and see if you can meet it. These aren't objections. Objections are when people are actually trying to really put an end to the conversation, or they really are moving toward a no. But there's more going on. There's more going on here than just that. So let's talk about our conditioning for a second. For most of us, as we're going through school, growing up, the person at the front of the room is the person who's in charge. And more specifically, our conditioning is if someone asks a question, our job is to, and probably in your head you said, answer it, because that's what we're conditioned to do. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of times. So and frankly, our brain is wired up that when it's posed a question, it wants to answer it. So what we want to make sure is that we work with the conditioning. So if someone asks you a question, we are prone to answering it. And I tell you, if there's one piece, if there's one thing that sticks in your head in this little session today, as a matter of fact, if you want to drop off the call after this, I totally respect it because it's good. But if there's like one thing, it's like grab the thought that when someone asks you a question, answer it in a minute. I want you to take a little bit of time to understand their question a little bit more. People will ask you a question, and if you take a second, just ask a question or two to understand their question better, and then answer it, it starts to get really, really powerful. So I want to make sure that you don't just get conditioned into, if someone asks you a question, you answer. So if they ask you a question, ask a question or two back to understand it, and then answer it. Now, you're not trying to deflect. You're not trying to defer. You're not trying to be suspect. You're trying to understand, okay? And we want to do this for two reasons. One is it gives you time to think. The second is it helps you understand what's actually going on. And probably most importantly, the person asking the questions is the person in charge. We've been conditioned in this our whole lives. So I want you to be asking the questions. They may have objections or conditions or reflexes, but I want you asking questions because it puts you into the driver's seat. So that's our conditioning. So really simple two-step process to handle any objection. And it works like this. So it's a different path than most people have been taught. Usually we've been taught, here's the rote answer. So if this, say that, if this, say that. So what I want to do is shift that and have you head down a slightly different path. And so the first step in it is this. I want you to acknowledge. If someone has an objection, I want you to acknowledge it. And by acknowledge, I mean actually validate it. You say, well, Chris, I don't want to validate it. I'm going to reinforce their objection. Actually, you're not. What you're going to reinforce is that you care about them. That what they're concerned about, you're concerned about. That if it's something that matters to them, it matters to you. I want you to acknowledge it. If you put a recommendation in front of a client and they say, whoa, that's way too much money. Well, our default is say, well, let's compare that to other things, or let's look at it in a different way. Actually, I want you to start with, listen, making sure that things are appropriately priced. That's important. Like, I appreciate what you're saying. I want you to go to their world first and actually spend some time with them and acknowledge and be with the fact that they go, that's too expensive. So they don't feel like you're just pushing it aside to get to your agenda of, but here's my comeback. We don't need to do that. If you have someone that you're working with, you're trying to help them. And if they've got a worry or a concern, then that becomes your worry. That becomes your concern. You actually need to go there and join them. So I want you to acknowledge it and take a second. So, you can say things like, that's a really good question. Or, it's not uncommon for people to be thinking about that. Or I love the fact that price is important to you because that means you're zeroed in on value. Awesome. Like take a moment and stick with them, so that they really hear that you're with them. Okay, that you acknowledge what they're saying. And then the second thing I want you to do is ask a question, because odds are the objection that you're hearing is not the objection they really have. There's usually the real objection is a couple of questions down. So let's say it's price, and they say, "Oh, that's too expensive." You say, "Hey, I like that you're keeping an eye on the numbers. That matters. What makes this too expensive in your mind?" Right? So start to understand it, and because what you may find is that their real issue is they don't know how to justify the price to a spouse who's not at the planning table. Or they just spent a pile of money on something else and now they're feeling bad about it. You have no idea what the actual objection or the real issue is. You're probably 2 or 3 questions down from it. So what we want to do is acknowledge and ask a question. Now, this lets us do a couple of things as well. When we take a second to acknowledge and ask a question, it allows you to stay a little bit detached. It allows you to stay a little bit more emotionless. It's like, okay, don't freak out yet. I don't have a comeback for this. I don't know what I'm going to say. Actually, you don't need to have a comeback, and you don't need to know what to say yet. What you need to do is say, I really hear that price matters to you. I really hear that making sure that you make a smart decision matters to you. I got that. And what are the specific things that you're concerned about here? Or what has you feel that this is going to be too expensive, or whatever it is? But you're going to ask a question. I'm going to give you some sample acknowledgments and questions that you can ask along the way. But it allows you to stay calm. And the reason that matters is this, is that when intelligence is high, when emotion is high, intelligence is low. Think about this. If you've ever been in an argument with someone, you're in an argument and you're arguing, and then the argument's over. And then 10 minutes later, you say, "Oh, I should have said this." Well, that's because you're not in your emotional centers of your brain. You're in your neocortex, your cerebral cortex. You're doing high order thinking now. You're clever. But when we're upset, we don't have access to as much. So I need you to stay calm when it happens. I need you to be empathetic and connected to what matters to them, so that you're not busy worrying about you getting to your good answer. What you're worried about is making sure that the thing that is a challenge to them, that you're acknowledging it and you're making sure you take the time to understand it. So I want you to stay emotionless. And then the process to it is just this. We're going to acknowledge and ask a question, and they're going to give you some feedback, and you're going to acknowledge that. And then you're going to ask a question to understand it. And you're going to make sure that you get to the root of what the actual objection is. And that's the thing that you need to address. Okay? And then that's a moment where you may want to reframe things or have them see it in a different perspective. So hopefully that's making sense to you here. Here's a couple of examples of, so how can you acknowledge? So you can say, "That's a great question," or "That's a good point," or "It's important to ask that," or "I feel the same way." I had advisors in here, but many clients say that to us. Or "I really appreciate what you're saying," or "No one has ever said that to me before." So if someone says something completely off the wall that you've never heard of, it's like, I have no answer for that as an objection. You can say, "No one has ever said that to me before. Tell me more about it." Or you can simply acknowledge, it's like, "I hear you," or "I see what you mean. I really get what you're trying to show me here." Okay, so these are just a handful that you can work with. But you just want to take a second. If they say, "It's too expensive," I don't want you to say, "I agree, it's too expensive." No, you don't have to take on their objection, but you need to acknowledge that it's valid. Is that making sense? All right, so what are questions you could ask? There's all kinds of questions. These are just a handful, but you can say, "Can you tell me more about that?" Or, if they're saying, "I don't want to talk to people like this, like you, get off the phone." You can say, "Hey, I hear you, you're busy." It's like, "Do you get calls like this often?" You can actually ask the question. Or you can ask them, "What are you comparing this to?" Or, "We're expecting something different in our conversation." Or, "Is there something you'd suggest we look at together?" Or, "What has you think that?" Have you had a similar experience to this before? Or, "What's your focus on the moment? What are you zeroed in on at the moment?" Or, "What would you like to see happen here?" And actually a favorite for me is simply the words, "Say more." It's like, "Hey, I really hear that this is important to you. Say more." And people will. They'll take a second and they'll actually tell you more about what they're thinking along the way. You don't have to be super incisive, but you need to demonstrate that what matters to them matters to you and that you want to understand it better. Okay? And you're understanding it better for them, not against them. You're not trying to trick them. You need to be careful about that so that it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm being positioned into a corner here. It's like they need to feel like you are on their side because you are on their side. That's how you get paid. You get paid when you're on someone else's side and you help them solve a problem. And the side effect is you get compensated for it. All right. So those are the keys that are the heart of it. And so I know we've gone through it quickly, but the thing I want to encourage you to do is practice, because practice makes, you probably said permanent in your head or perfect in your head, but the answer is permanent. Practice makes permanent. Okay. So you want to practice perfectly. So here's how you can practice in your office. And Bruce Lee talked about this. He said, I don't fear the man who's practiced 10,000 kicks once. I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. You want to practice and practice and practice, and you want to do it perfectly. And here's how it works. Make a list of objections that you're concerned about, and then partner up with someone in your office and have them say the objection to you. And your job is to acknowledge it and ask a question without stumbling. So I'll give you an example. I put together this little practice list for you to get you started. So the objection might be, I have an advisor. Okay, so I need you to ask me that. So you're gonna say, I have an advisor. And I'm gonna say, and you're gonna say, stop. Because if I don't go right into acknowledge and ask a question without stumbling, I want you to stop me. Because I don't want to build a habit or practice imperfectly. So you're gonna say, I already have an advisor. And I'm gonna go, oh, stop. Just go again. Just like, oh, that's a really good point. I'll stop. I was tripping over that. It's like, I already have an advisor. It's like, hey, a lot of our clients already have advisors. And let me ask you a question. All right, that was pretty good, right? Have you had an experience like you've had with us before? Well, that was pretty smooth. So I want to keep doing it until whatever objections I'm facing on a regular basis, I start to feel confident about. And what's interesting is, for whatever reason, we seem to get the objections we worry about most. If you worry about price, you get the price objection most. If you worry about the fact that they have another advisor, that seems to be the objection that you get the most. So you got to practice the ones you fear the most. And what happens is this: if you're worried about, I have an advisor, it's like, oh no, I never know what to do with that one. You're going to master that. You're going to be like, all right, I'm stepping into the next one. Bring me the I have an advisor. Oh, they won't ask it now. It's like you've solved it in your own head. So I want you to make sure that you really take care of this and practice this back and forth and back and forth. One of the questions that's just come up is there a way to do this process via email? If someone objects to you in an email, you just follow the exact same process. Acknowledge it and ask them a few questions so that you understand it better. Ideally, you want to do it face-to-face. Or at least over the phone. From a practice point of view, though, you need to practice it back and forth with a real live human in your office out loud. You have to move your mouth. You can't do this one in your head. You actually have to practice it out loud so that you get used to doing it and you won't be tripping on it. All right. So there's objections. Acknowledge, ask a question. Acknowledge, ask a question. Acknowledge that, ask a question until you understand, until you get to the guts of it, and there's no more. No, this is the thing that I'm really concerned with. Great. Now we want to look at, how do we reframe that? How do we do something with that? So let's talk about reframing. Now, reframing is a fun one. And the reason I say it's fun is because we're really digging into language on this one. And there may be spots here where you go, whoa, Chris, I am never going to remember that. And it's like, you are right, if you say so. What I'm not interested in is you fighting for your limitations. So let's go at it from a different area. It's like, when you go through this, like, I don't know this and I'm going to learn it. And I'm going to learn how to recognize it when it happens, and it's going to become second nature because I'll practice it. So that's just a different thought. They're just thoughts. So let's look at reframing though, because there's a little bit to this. And I think as you start to look at it, you're going to say, oh, I get how this goes. By the way, there's a good chance you're already doing good objection handling, but you didn't know that you were doing it. Same thing with reframing. I have no doubt that you've been reframing, but what I want to do is give you an actual structure to it. And as I've looked at language, I've been able to identify 27 different ways that you can reframe things. We're going to look at 8 of them. all right? So the structure of a reframe, the idea is this, is if you change the content of something, you change the context. So for example, let's take a library, okay? So if we play a football game in a library, it actually changes it from a library to a football field. Does this make sense? I changed the content and that changed the context. At the same time, if you change the meaning of the context, you change what happens in it. You change the content. So what we want to do is start to shift how things are viewed by either shifting the context or the content. Okay, so and there's really two big ones I want to look at here. So one is called cause and effect, and the other is called complex equivalence. So cause and effect says that A causes B. So we aren't going to act because it costs too much. Okay, so A causes B. All right. Our other option is complex equivalence, is where A equals B. So doing discovery means you just want to sell me more. So it equals something. So one causes the other equals something. So what I want to do is look at these two examples. We aren't going to act because it costs too much, and doing discovery means you just want to sell me more. And I want to show you different ways that you can reframe those and explain kind of the sequence or elements to making that happen, all right? Deep breath. We're into words here. Okay, here we go. So the first is the meta frame, and that's to actually change the belief about a belief. So how is it possible that they can believe that? So we aren't going to act because it costs too much. So what we want to do is alter the belief. So they're zeroed in on cost here. So we want to say, so value is different than cost because it includes the returns as well as the cost. Have you considered the value? So instead of them zeroed in on a belief that you don't do things when they cost too much, what we're trying to do is alter their belief about that belief and say that, actually, I shouldn't believe that cost is the thing. I should think that value is the thing. So we aren't going to act because it costs too much. We say, well, so value is different than cost. It includes the returns as well as the cost. Have you considered the value you're going to receive, the returns you're going to get, not just what you're going to pay? Well, now we've reframed it. We've just had them look at it from a different way. So similarly, with doing discovery means you just want to sell me more. You could reframe it and say, our work is about helping you find confidence and clarity, not products. Because they have a belief that you want to sell them more. Well, you want to give them a new belief. The new belief is that actually what we're here to do is help you find confidence and clarity, not product. The side effect of that may be product, but that's okay. So we're altering the belief. Okay, so that's one. And again, these are in the PDF download, so you grab it and practice with it. Once you've identified some of the key objections that you're dealing with in a regular way, start to look at how am I going to reframe them, okay, so that you can handle the objection and then you can actually do a reframe. So you can change the frame size. You can you can take a more generalized approach to something. So what's something that they haven't noticed that's tied to this? So we aren't going to act because it costs too much. It's actually, people are choosing this specifically because of what they get, not because of what they give up. So they're focused on what they're going to lose as opposed to what they're going to get. So we want to shift that. Or similarly, with doing discovery means you just want to sell me more. Our interest isn't as small as you buying a product. It's about you living with wealth clarity or something like that, okay? So it's like we're going to change the frame size of it, make it bigger or smaller. So our interest isn't as small as you buying a product. Our interest is you living with wealth clarity and having the life that you want. That's a different answer, okay? Let's look at another one. You can apply to self. So A to A. So we aren't going to act is part A, and part B is because it costs too much. So we aren't going to act because it costs too much. Actually, not acting on things is what gets people into trouble with their wealth. We just use their argument against itself. Or doing discovery means you just want to sell me more. Actually, doing discovery means discovering, not buying. It means understanding more, not having less. So we're using the doing discovery actually as the key. It's like doing discovery means discovering, not buying. It means understanding, not having less. So we're applying that argument to itself. We can apply to self with part B to part B. We aren't going to act because it costs too much. Actually, the price of that thought is much too high. There's a price tag to not acting. So part B there is it costs too much. So we're going after cost. And we're going to apply cost to their decision. It's like, no, the price of that thought is much too high. It's way too high. There's a price tag to you not acting. And you need to make sure that they're clear on it. Doing discovery means you just want to sell me more, okay? I understand that you want me to buy that you don't need anything more, that you don't need more of anything. Okay, good. So you're applying it back, like they're trying to sell you in this moment. So good, because discovery isn't about buying, it's about discovering. Okay, so you're bringing the argument of part B back against the objection. See how this gets, there's a fair bit to this, right? But with a little bit of practice, it becomes a normal thing. You start to realize, is this a cause and effect or a complex equivalence? Reality strategy. And so it's like, how do they know that their belief is true? You want to pressure test their belief. It's like, we aren't going to act because it costs too much. It's like, what makes a thing affordable to you? It's like, oh, well, and now you get them into the conversation about what does it actually mean for something to be affordable. Similarly, doing discovery means you just want to sell me more. What have we done together that would suggest that? You want to pressure test the belief. So that may be a fear that they have, but it's you actually want to poke at that belief and see if that's something that's actually true, because it's probably not. Next one, secondary intent. Why are they saying this? Like, what's the secondary gain? So we aren't going to act because it costs too much. So your intent is to save money in the long run? Like, is that their intent? Like, what's the reason underneath? It's like, anytime someone complains about something, it's a very useful thing because there's a dream or a desire that's underneath the complaint. Otherwise, they wouldn't complain. So if somebody's complaining that it's raining out, you already know that, oh, I can't stand it when it rains. It's like, that's because the dream is what? I like bright, sunny, dry days, right? So it's like anytime someone complains, start to look toward the opposite, and that's usually the dream that they actually want. So speak to that. So we aren't going to act because it costs too much. Okay, so your intent is to save money in the long run. Well, if they move toward yeah, that's exactly it. Great. Let me show you how so that we got that handled, right? You're just going to honor that belief. Similarly, doing discovery means, you just want to sell me more. It's like, so your intent is to avoid being sold something? Like, is that your intent, or do you have a different one? Right? And it's, well, yeah, I don't want to be sold anything. It's like, no problem. I won't sell you anything. You can choose to buy things if it makes sense, but I'll not sell it. I'm not going to sell you. And interestingly, people love to buy stuff. We do it constantly as a society. We hate being sold stuff. At the same time, how many things do you have in your life that someone didn't sell to you? Just something to ponder. Alternate outcome. What's another outcome that they could shift to? So we aren't going to act because it costs too much. How well it meets your needs is the real issue. Like, bring their attention to a different target. So they're busy worrying about, it costs too much. It's like, actually, the thing you got to be zeroed in on is how well will it meet your needs? Just give them another outcome they can shift to. Or doing discovery means you just want to sell me more. Actually, the real outcome is ensuring that you're in control. You're the one that's in control, not us. It's like, oh, okay. So we just pulled them out of that target and moved them to a different one. Okay? Hopefully this is making sense to you. One more, consequences. What will happen if they continue to think this way? We aren't going to act because it costs too much. It's like, look, you don't have to act on anything you don't want to. If you continue down this path, you will end up with some disappointing results, though, and let me explain why. So you're just going to carry them forward as to here are the consequences if they continue to think the way that they're thinking. And sometimes you may say, well, Chris, that sounds pretty risky. It's like, I'm going to tell them that they're wrong. Well, first of all, we've done some objection handling. We've already acknowledged. We've already met them where they are. We have asked some questions to understand it better. It's like, I can't do this because it's like, it's going to cost too much. It's like, look, if you go down this path, you're going to end up with results that you're not happy with. And you're saying this for them, not against them. And this is the thing to have in your head with objections. You handle objections for them, right? On their behalf, to help them. It's not so that you get to place a product, okay? So if you continue down this path, you will end up with some disappointing results. We've seen it happen. Let me explain. Or doing discovery means you just want to sell me more. Actually, avoidance is incomplete. Like, you have to be willing to take the time to know what you want, or you will only ever get it by accident. You can't avoid it. You can't avoid it. You got to understand what you really want and why that matters to you. So there's a lot here. And my goal here is to provide you with a primer on what's the structure of how you respond to an objection, and what are some examples about how reframing behaves, because we really are working with language. We're looking either at the structure of the sentence, or we're reframing the size of it, or we're casting them into the future with consequences, or we're challenging them with a new belief, or we're questioning or pressure testing the belief along the way. There can be a fair bit that's going on here. But here's the thing I think that's really important is that, you're the one, you're the fire. You're the one that's going to ignite things. You're the one that's going to light them up. You're the one that is going to create opportunities out there. And if you're not willing to stand in the heat, it's not going to go well. You have to focus on how you set up your marketing and your messaging in the first place. You have to put the ground conditions in place for trust, and you have to handle objections well. And interestingly, it's the thing that many advisors are deeply concerned about. There's sort of three things that show up. How do I meet people? How do I get them into that first meeting? And what should that be? What should that look like? And how do I handle objections along the way? It's like, well, but we're not practicing it. And in fairness, you may not have had a structure or the pieces to be able to look at it, but you do now. And I want you to practice it, because I want you to step into those meetings with an absolute confidence and a clarity about how you're going to answer those objections, how you're going to reframe things on their behalf to help them make brilliant decisions when it comes to the advice that you're giving them about what they should be doing, what their plan should look like, what products or services that they should be putting in place. They're counting on you to be the one to give them that leadership. So you're the fire. You're the one that's going to have to make that happen for them. And it's also the courageous space that can be quite difficult to step into sometimes. So those were the slides that I had. And what I'm willing to do here is to just open the chat facility up for just a minute longer. And if someone has some questions, feel free to put them in there. The other thing that I'm open to is if you want to email us or message us some objections that you run into frequently, or you're not sure how you want to respond to, I'm happy for us to actually map those out a little bit further, or if there's an appetite for it, even to do a group call where we actually just talk through some of them and practice them in live time. We can't do that on a regular basis, but we could do one of those if there's an appetite for that. So does anyone have a specific question that they'd like to type into the chat window? We'll just give it a minute here. And if there is, fantastic. And if not, we're going to wrap this up, and you're going to have access to the replay very, very shortly.